Shops like this, they catch fire real easy. The words dropped with a crooked smile, drifting to the sharp scent of spilled red wine and glow of fading sun on an old liquor shop sign. But what that cop didn't know was this. Dorian Miles Shepard wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was a former special ops soldier who survived 2 blood-soaked tours in Ramadi. And this time, he wasn't protecting a nation. He was defending the last piece of home his family had left. If in Elmswood you have to fight just to keep a store standing, what does justice look like where you live? Late afternoon in Elmswood, Georgia, the sun cast a blaze of orange across the dust-coated wooden sign bearing faded letters, Shepard Spirits and Fine Wines. Inside the small shop off Franklin Avenue, Dorian Miles Shepard stood behind the counter, drying the last glass of the day. He wore a rolled-up button-down shirt, his salt and pepper hair slightly tousled, and his broad shoulders, those of a man who once carried a military pack, seemed to silently hold up the whole room. The bell above the glass door jingled as Mrs. Thelma Grace Shepard, 76, stepped in with slow, careful steps. She reached for a bottle of red wine, the one Dorian always kept stock for her, and offered a toothless smile. "You still haven't fixed that light over the door?" Flickers like it's got a seizure. Dorian chuckled softly, slipping the bottle into a brown paper bag. "That bulb's more stubborn than the insurgents I ran into in Ramadi, Ma." She laughed, a shaky laugh still full of life, and pulled out her wallet. He gently waved her hand away. "It's family, Ma. No charge." Before she could protest, the doorbell jingled again. This time, it wasn't a regular. Officer Cole Rickman, 47, tall and built, his mustache sharp as a blade, entered with Travis Langford, 35, eyes twitchy, hand never straying far from his duty belt. The air filled with the polished leather stench of decaying authority. Rickman grinned falsely, placing a hand lightly on the counter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Shepard. Just making a little security check, that's all." Langford paced the floor like he was inspecting cargo, his eyes skimming the liquor license on the wall, smirking. "Shops like this are lucky, huh? Still open this long. Not everyone's that fortunate." Dorian didn't move. His gaze turned cold, like January frost. "What do you want from me?" Rickman shrugged and slid a business card across the counter. In neighborhoods like this, especially ones being rezoned, accidents happen. If you want things to go smoothly, permits, health inspections, fire codes, we can assist. Dorian looked at the card like it was a dried bloodstain on a floor he never cleaned. He didn't pick it up. Call it what it is. Protection money. Langford chuckled darkly, just loud enough for Mrs. Thelma to hear. "You know, shops like this, stuff tend to catch fire real easy." Dorian stepped out from behind the counter, each footfall like a nail hammered into the wooden floor. He placed himself between his mother and the officers. "I've lived through war. I've seen men in real uniforms die for something greater than themselves. Don't you stand in my shop and disgrace the one you wear." The air thickened. Rickman smirked, the friendliness gone from his eyes. "You just turned down a chance to keep things quiet. Let's hope you're smart enough to handle the consequences of that choice." They turned to leave. Just before stepping out the door, Langford casually knocked a bottle of wine off the shelf. It shattered. The sharp, pungent scent of red wine filled the room like a warning. Dorian said nothing. He looked down at the shards of glass at his feet, then out toward the fiery sunset beyond the window. In that moment, Elmswood fell into a strange silence. But inside Dorian, a different sound had begun to rise. Not the crash of broken glass, but the ring of something waking up. That night, Elmswood was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No car horns, no barking dogs, just a whisper of wind weaving through alleyways and a flickering street lamp on the corner of Franklin Avenue. Dorian Miles Shepard locked up just before midnight, like always. He rolled the steel gate down, slid the padlock into place, and twisted it tight. The same callous fingers that once gripped a rifle in Ramadi now clenched around the lock of a small liquor store, his family's last remaining asset. He turned and walked toward his old pickup parked beneath the shadow of an oak tree, unaware that someone had been watching him from the dark for over an hour, waiting. By dawn, Thelma Grace Shepard was the first to see the broken glass scattered across the storefront steps. Her hands shook as she called Dorian. When he arrived, he didn't need to unlock the door. It had already been forced open. A gaping hole had been smashed into the front window. Shelves toppled, bottles shattered. The sharp sting of wine hung thick in the air. Boxes rummaged through. The safe cracked open, yet the cash was untouched. Nothing stolen, except the store's peace. Dorian stepped inside, saying nothing. His eyes swept the wreckage. He had seen scenes like this before, in Fallujah in Tikrit, but never imagined he'd see one here, in his own hometown. Thelma stood just outside the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, her voice small. Maybe just some petty thieves? Dorian didn't answer. He knew better. This wasn't a robbery. And right on cue, less than 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up to the curb. Rickman and Langford stepped out, this time without bothering to knock. Rickman walked in feigning surprise. "Oh no! What happened here, Mrs. Shepard?" Langford stepped through the shattered glass, glancing around like a TV detective. "Heard a report about a break-in. We're just here to help with the investigation. Mind if I ask, did anyone else have access after hours?" Dorian clenched his fists. "No one. I locked up just before midnight. The door was intact." Langford tilted his head, then pretended to spot something behind the counter. He bent down and picked up a small plastic bag filled with a white powdery substance. "Then what's this?" he said flatly, like he'd rehearsed it. Rickman stepped up, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "Mr. Shepard, this could really put your business license in jeopardy." Dorian didn't need a lab test to know what it was. He took one step forward, eyes steady. "I know what you're doing, and I swear you're not going to run me out like this." Langford reached for the cuffs, a crooked grin on his face. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Shepard, and I suggest for once you take that advice." Thelma burst into tears on the curb as she watched her son get handcuffed in front of the shop. Neighbors peeked out from their windows. A few phones went up, but no one stepped forward. Dorian didn't resist. He held his head high, locking eyes with a young man across the street, filming everything. His gaze didn't plead, "I'm innocent." It said, "Record it all. I will not be silent." And that was how it began. Not with gunfire, but with the cold click of handcuffs under golden morning light. In the days that followed, Dorian Miles Shepard was detained, then quietly released. No charges filed, no record log, no statement made. But Elmswood wasn't naive. The community saw it for what it was, a warning shot, fired by men in uniform who treated the law like a bargaining chip. Dorian's store was sealed for 3 days. When he returned, most of the inventory had spoiled. The air reeked of wine, cigarette smoke, and disinfectant, a silent declaration. "We can come in whenever we want." And they did. Around 2 a.m. on Thursday, as the small town of Elmswood slept, 2 unmarked patrol cars rolled up outside shop. Dorian was inside, restocking shelves. He hadn't slept since the wrongful arrest. The front door slammed open, no knock, no warning. Cole Rickman and Travis Langford stormed in like it was a drug raid. Behind them came 2 other officers, unfamiliar faces with all too familiar eyes. "I thought you needed a warrant for this," Dorian said calmly. Rickman didn't answer. He walked straight up and shoved Dorian hard into the counter. Langford followed, baton in hand. "We heard you got some new contraband tonight. Just a routine check, Mr. Shepard. Don't make this harder than it has to be," Rickman sneered. Dorian straightened, his back pressed against the counter, his eyes on the 4 men in front of him. Then he said, "If you really want to search, go ahead. But remember, I've survived 2 wars. And I haven't forgotten a single lesson from the battlefield." Rickman let out a mocking laugh. Langford smirked. But before any of them could speak, a baton swung. And just like that, the fire lit. Dorian ducked low, taking the blow on his left forearm. Pain shot through, but nothing snapped. With his right hand, he grabbed Langford's wrist, pivoted, pulled him forward, and drove his knee into the man's gut. Langford crumpled like a sack of grain. A swift leg sweep dropped the unfamiliar officer just as he was reaching for his weapon. Rickman lunged, landing a solid punch on Dorian's jaw. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but he held firm. He stepped back half a pace, then countered with a sharp hook to Rickman's ribcage. Dorian didn't fight like a man who sold wine. He fought like a soldier still standing in the dead zone. Every movement was deliberate, cold, and precise. Each strike meant to break rhythm, disorient, and neutralize. Another attacker locked the baton across his throat from behind. Dorian slammed his back into the wall to break the hold, then drove his elbow up and back into the attacker's jaw. Teeth cracked. The man staggered away, mouth flooding with blood. Glass shattered across the floor. The shop had become a war zone. The smell of liquor mixed with blood in the air. But Dorian was still standing. At last, only Rickman remained, gasping for breath, his gun drawn. Dorian didn't flinch. He just looked him straight in the eye. "If you're going to shoot me, you better not miss. Because if I survive, I will not forget." Rickman tightened his grip on the trigger, but his hand trembled. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Someone in the neighborhood had called for help. Rickman clenched his jaw, cursed under his breath, and backed away, pulling the others with him. No words, no report. Dorian stood amidst the wreckage, his hands bleeding, but his eyes burning brighter than ever. He knew this fight had only just begun, and this time he wouldn't be fighting alone. Blood still dripped from the corner of Dorian Miles Shepard's mouth as he staggered through the alley behind his store. His legs faltered, but his gaze was sharp and cold. Every step carved deeper into wounds that hadn't had time to close. The night wind tore through his torn shirt, slicing through aching ribs. But what stole his breath wasn't pain. It was rage. And it only grew stronger with the realization. They didn't just want to ruin him. They wanted to erase him. From the town, from memory, from history. He veered into an abandoned parking lot, where his battered pickup truck sat beneath a maple tree. He flung open the driver's side door, gasping, then reached for the dashboard, flipping on a scanner he had installed himself, back in his military days. A soft crackle sparked to life. Fragments of police chatter and static filtered through. He's gone. No blood trail, but that bastard couldn't have gone far. Dorian's hand still trembled as he reached into the pocket of the jacket, dropped by the young cop during the chaos. A black phone, no logo, no markings, rested in his palm. It was the kind of device that never showed up on official inventories. Dorian narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just a phone. It was a tactical handset, encrypted, untraceable, built for covert operations. He powered it on. A dark screen lit up with a code prompt. 6 characters. He had 3 minutes. Using a crude decryption sequence he'd learned from a Special Ops Unit's tech division, Dorian ran through a basic pattern. The device buzzed, then unlocked. The first folder held audio files. Cole Rickman's voice crackled through the speaker. "Push him out. File the fake medical report. Plant the package behind the liquor rack. Wait for Royston's man to handle it." Dorian froze. Royston. He knew that name. Ronan Royston, real estate mogul with a ruthless grip on Elmswood's redevelopment. The man behind the gentrification surge, forcing out black families and mom-and-pop businesses. Buying the city lot by lot, block by block. He scrolled further. Hidden camera images showed Rickman shaking hands with a man in a suit in the City Hall parking lot, smiling, passing a folder. Zoomed-in shots showed a property map annotated. After Shepard, transfer within 48 hours. A targeted purge. Just then, the phone vibrated in his hand. A notification flashed. Device is being tracked. Signal live. Dorian's heart pounded. They'd rigged it with GPS. Without hesitation, he leapt from the truck and hurled the phone into the nearest public trash bin. He struck a lighter, tossed it into the pile of paper at the bottom. Flames roared up quickly, devouring the trap and the bait. But it didn't matter. He'd already cloned the entire device onto a mini hard drive hidden in the heel of his boot. He wasn't just running anymore. He had ammunition. On the truck's back seat, he grabbed a field medical kit and wrapped his wounds himself. A former Spec Ops soldier never needed a hospital to stop bleeding. And this time, he didn't need a courtroom to prove what was true. He needed just one name, Royston. Dorian Shepard gripped the steering wheel tight. Blood still seeped, but it wasn't a mark of defeat anymore. It was the beginning of retaliation. He drove through the night, heading north toward the outskirts of Elmswood. The streets at 2 a.m. were silent, not with peace, but with tension. They only emphasized what was now painfully clear. He stood at the crossroads of life and death. Dorian wasn't a soldier fighting for a nation anymore. He was a man fighting for truth. Late afternoon in Elmswood, Georgia, the sun cast a fiery orange glow across the dust-covered wooden sign that read, weather-worn, "Shepherd's Spirits and Fine Wines." Inside the small liquor shop, nestled off Franklin Avenue, Dorian Miles Shepherd stood behind the counter, polishing the last glass of the day. Sleeves rolled up, salt and pepper hair tousled. The broad shoulders of a former soldier quietly held the room like a fortress. The chime above the door jingled softly as Thelma Grace Shepherd, 76, stepped in with slow, deliberate steps. She headed straight for a bottle of red wine, the one Dorian always saved for her, and smiled with a toothless warmth. "You still haven't fixed that porch light?" she teased. "It's flickering like a strobe light in a fit." Dorian chuckled, slipping the bottle into a paper bag. "That bulb's more stubborn than the grunts I met in Ramadi, Mama." She laughed, the sound shaky but live, pulling out her wallet. Dorian gently pushed her hand aside. "It's family. It's on the house." Before she could respond, the bell rang again. This time, it wasn't a familiar face. Officer Cole Rickman, 47, tall and broad with a razor-sharp mustache, stepped in alongside Travis Langford, 35, with shifting eyes and a hand that never strayed far from his belt. The air turned stale with the stink of polished shoes and decaying authority. Rickman offered a fake smile, resting a hand on the counter. "Afternoon, Mr. Shepherd. Just swinging by for a little safety check." Langford wandered like a buzzard, eyeing the liquor license on the wall and smirking. "Shops around here are lucky to still be open. Not everyone's that fortunate." Dorian didn't move. His eyes hardened like January frost. "What do you need from me?" Rickman shrugged, sliding a business card across the counter. "In areas like this, up for redevelopment, it's easy for things to get complicated. Licenses, health checks, fire inspections. We can help smooth that out." Dorian stared at the card like it was a bloodstain on the floor. He didn't touch it. Call it what it is. Protection money. Langford sneered just loud enough for Thelma to hear. "Shame when shops like these have accidents." Dorian stepped out from behind the counter, his boots landing like iron on the wooden floor. He stood firmly between his mother and the officers. "I've seen real uniforms. Watched real soldiers die for something bigger than themselves. Don't you stand in my shop and disgrace the one you wear." The air thickened. Rickman's smile faded, his eyes colder now. "You just turned down the smart option. Hope you're ready for what comes next." They turned to leave. On his way out, Langford casually knocked a bottle off the shelf. It shattered. Red wine seeped across the floor like a warning. Dorian didn't flinch. He stared down at the broken glass, then out into the setting sun. In that moment, Elmswood went silent. But in Dorian's chest, something else had begun to sound. Not the crash, the call to rise. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the morning mist, deep in the basement beneath Trask's old auto shop, 3 figures sat huddled around a large projection screen, like a silent courtroom in session. Dorian sat with arms folded, eyes locked on the stream of data pulled from Rickman's encrypted phone. Jessa Vaughn continued the decryption process, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "The transaction started over 18 months ago," she said, sorting through folders. "Royston's not working alone. He's the tip of something much larger." Trask bowed his head, pushing forward a compiled file on Ariana Quill, a black restaurant owner driven into bankruptcy after health violations fabricated by the city's inspection bureau. The file held receipts, fine notices, and an anonymous letter from an insider. "It always starts the same," Vaughn explained, pulling up a network diagram on the screen. Every business targeted was located in communities of color, bi-weekly inspections, fines, then anonymous complaints, and eventually shutdowns. Though Dorian had seen the horrors of war, something about this pierced deeper, like a needle pressed into the spine. Names, addresses, property values before and after seizure. Each entry read like an auction slip. Only here, it was people's lifeblood being sold. Royston and Rickman are the bridge. Vaughn continued. They connect public power to private profit. The break-ins, the beatings, the planted drugs. They're all part of clearing the path. And after every incident, Royston expands his redevelopment project. Trask pointed to a screenshot of an internal email. Royston wants to sanitize the area before Company A begins mall construction. Company A, Vaughn noted, was a holding group linked to 2 current mayors in the state. Dorian remembered Ms. Wilkins. Ariana, the quiet storefronts trying to survive for years, now crushed by paper laws and phony enforcements. We have a meeting with the State Department of Justice and select media outlets, Vaughn said softly. But before we go public, I need a frontline witness. Dorian knew exactly who she meant. Ariana. And what they had just uncovered. Ariana Quill wasn't just a victim. She was a linchpin in exposing a brutal empire. In the shadows of Elmswood, the 3 weren't just chasing justice. They were confronting an entire system. As dusk settled, Dorian Miles Shepard steered his battered pickup down a dirt road toward Warehouse 14 on the southern fringe of Elmswood. He wasn't following a hunch. For 3 days, Jessa Vaughn and her FBI tech team had been tracking transaction trails embedded in encrypted networks. Data extracted from the phone Dorian had recovered before destroying it. One location surfaced repeatedly. 14 Southline Freight, an abandoned depot listed as sealed years ago, but now inexplicably active in a freight manifest tied to a shell company run by Ronan Royston. If there's any remaining financial record that hasn't been scrubbed, it'll be there. Vaughn had said, "We're looking for physical ledgers, paper, the kind that can't be erased." Satellite images and detailed schematics showed 3 access points, but only one reliable exit. Dorian chose to breach through the rear, a rusted metal door long forgotten by those who operated in the shadows. He carried leather gloves, a compact flashlight, a Glock 19 tucked in a low-back holster, and a disguised camera provided by Vaughn. But the most vital thing Dorian brought with him was the calm resolve of a combat veteran who had survived 3 blood-soaked deployments. He wasn't there to start a war, but when forced to choose between survival and defeat, no one outlasted Dorian Miles Shepard. The warehouse door groaned with a dry snap as he pried it open. Inside, a haze of dim tungsten light dangled from loose-wired fixtures, casting scattered shadows across a maze of inventory crates, industrial safes, and jammed filing drawers. What he sought was singular. A black leather ledger, the original, with Ronan Royston's unmistakable signature. The name stamped inside as a monogram. Roar. Dorian moved silently down the aisles, the hidden camera on his jacket, capturing everything in sight. But within minutes, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness. Irregular, hurried. He had company. 4 men appeared from the far end of the corridor, batons, metal rods, and a shotgun between them. No uniforms, but every movement screamed trained enforcement. These weren't security guards. They were police, or had been. Dorian killed the light instantly, dropping low between 2 stacked crates. A flashlight beam swept across a nearby shelf. Check the west wing. The lead ordered. We've got an anomaly near the rear entry. When one of the men veered from the group down a narrow side aisle, Dorian moved. Quick, silent, precise. A chokehold from behind. Steel-tight arms cutting off breath. One swift takedown. No wasted motion. During the struggle, a phone clipped to the man's belt hit the floor. Dorian grabbed it. Another encrypted comms device, the same kind Rickman had once used. He also swiped the guard's access badge, stuffing both into his backpack before melting into the shadows again, making for the office wing, where physical ledgers were most likely stored. There, recessed behind a false panel, was a wall-mounted safe, fingerprint scanner, keypad lock. On the desk nearby, a steaming mug of coffee and a small open notebook. Inside, handwritten codes and a scrawled note. Royston, ledger number 9. The safe clicked open. Dorian pulled free a thick, black leather-bound book stamped confidential in faded red. Page after page of transaction logs, kickback routing, initials, timestamps, and on the final page, unmistakable, Ronan Royston's signature, beside a seal marked internal clearance. Undeniable proof. But then, the wail of a siren. Headlights flared through the warehouse's front windows. A black SUV rolled in. From its driver's seat, the face caught in the beam. Cole Rickman. He hadn't been arrested. He was still pulling strings. No time. Dorian crashed through a narrow rear window, landing in a tumble on the sloping grass behind the building. Blood from reopened wounds soaked through his shirt, but the ledger was safe in hand, and the recovered comms phone was still active, GPS tracking enabled. The beating pulse of justice echoed in his chest, syncing with the device in his pack. If he moved quickly, the live GPS signal might not just expose their network's core. It might lead him to Ariana Quill, and the beginning of Royston's empire unraveling. Dorian Miles Shepard traced a trail. Numbers, aliases, cryptic initials, and payment coordinates from the ledger and the encrypted phone, all leading to a small, abandoned warehouse on the eastern edge of Elmswood. It wasn't a transit hub. No containers. No machinery. Just a brick building swallowed by reeds and silence. But according to the decrypted logs, this was the last place Ariana Quill had been seen alive. He parked 2 blocks away, killed the headlights, and retrieved his sidearm from the glove compartment. There was no time for guesses. He'd lost too much to silence. Now was the time for endings. The night swallowed him as he slipped through a break in the chain-link fence, footsteps as soft as settling dust. Every window was sealed, except one at the rear, slightly pried from the inside. Inside, the air was thick, mildew, rubbing alcohol rust, and something else. Old blood. A single figure sat bound to a chair at the center of the warehouse, head slumped forward, hair veiling her face. Ariana. Before he could move closer, a voice emerged from the shadows. "I knew you'd come, Dorian." Cole Rickman. He stepped from behind a rusted pillar, gloved hand steady, eyes like frozen steel. No gun, just a reverse grip combat knife gleaming under a swinging bulb. No call to backup? Dorian asked, voice flat. "Not for you. I wanted to do this myself. The way you used to do it in Ramadi, right?" Rickman smirked, like the war still pulsed in his chest. Dorian said nothing. He dropped his pistol to the floor and nudged it away with his boot. 2 ex-soldiers. No badges. No ranks. Just a reckoning. The fight erupted like a silent detonation. Rickman struck first, slashing low, aiming to sever tendons. Dorian twisted aside, responding with a body shot that sent Rickman stumbling. The man laughed, wiping blood from his lip. Still quick, but not quick enough. The blade tore through Dorian's shirt, carving a shallow arc from shoulder to abdomen. Blood warmed his waistband, but his eyes never wavered. Rickman lunged again, a brutal string of attacks honed through thousands of drills. But even through pain, Dorian held formation, waiting, watching. He saw the left flank drop. Dorian snatched a knife hand, wrenched it hard, then drove a knee into Rickman's leg. The man buckled. "This is a Ramadi, Rickman. You don't have a chopper waiting for you here." Rickman tried to rise, but the balance had shifted. Dorian's final punch crashed into his jaw like a hammer, sending him crashing to the concrete. Dorian rushed Ariana, cutting the restraints. Her pulse, faint, but they're alive. Outside, the growing wail of sirens filled the distance. Gideon Trask and Agent Vaughn had followed the second GPS beacon. Their headlights slashed through the dark. Officers stormed the warehouse, blades of light cutting down shadows. Rickman lay bloody beneath a splintered crate, wrists locked in Trask and Vaughn's grip. Dorian stood over him, breath ragged, still stared at the man who'd nearly ended his life. Rickman spat blood, coughing as he looked up. "You'll see eventually," he rasped through cracked lips. "I was just a pawn." Vaughn stepped closer, her flashlight blazing into Rickman's eyes. "Even pawns get indicted, Rickman. And tonight, this is your last move." Outside, Dorian carried Ariana into the red-blue wash of the police lights. The night wind rushed across the field of reeds as if Elmswood itself exhaled. But Dorian knew the war wasn't over. This was just the end of the opening game. That morning, sunlight pierced through the narrow windows of the Elmswood courthouse's interrogation wing. Like quiet arrows through a battlefield, Dorian Miles Shepard sat upright at the metal table, hands in front of him. No cuffs, no escort, Across from him sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Everett Grayson. Silver hair, pale gray suit, thin tie, and eyes that had seen too much but learned to flinch at nothing. "You know why I'm here," Grayson began, not threatening but clear. "You should be facing at least 10 federal charges: assault on law enforcement, trespass on federal property, unlawful possession of restricted materials, but..." He paused, placing a file folder on the table. "We're prepared to wipe it all clean. If you sign this and say nothing..." Dorian looked down at the document. The fine print offered him peace. Total immunity in exchange for permanent silence. "You'll have your peace," Grayson added, his voice steady. "No more running. No more threats. No more rooms like this. Just let America keep turning." Dorian didn't rush. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a black ballpoint pen, the same one he'd once used to write letters to his mother from the battlefield. He clicked the pen open and tore the agreement clean in half. The sound of ripping paper cracked through the quiet room. Grayson's lip twitched, not with anger, but surprise. "I didn't spend my life fighting," Dorian said slowly, "just to stay silent when the country needs truth." He stood, without asking, without waiting, and walked out the door. In his coat pocket, a single USB drive. Inside, the entire story. The recorded conversation between Rickman and Rohr. The original ledger with Royston's signature. Footage of illegal seizures, photos of broken storefronts, and sworn statements from Ariana Quill and dozens of other targeted business owners. 3 hours later, the Elmswood Tribune broke the story. Elmswood police and land grab scandal. Evidence links officers to Rohr Investment Network. By sunset, the story was on CNN, NBC, and Reuters. News helicopters buzzed above the city's police department, where citizens gathered, not in protest, but in righteous demand for justice. At City Hall, the mayor of Elmswood resigned. Federal investigations exploded across the state. FBI agents raided the offices of attorneys linked to Rohr. And those who once dismissed Dorian Shepard as just another angry black man had no choice but to look again. Grayson stood alone in a Department of Justice war room, watching the live news coverage. He exhaled through his teeth. He won. Back at Shepard Spirits, the once trash store was quiet, rebuilt, and reborn. Dorian stood behind the counter, towel in hand, polishing the glass under morning light. There was no anger in his eyes anymore. He didn't need forgiveness. He needed the truth to be seen. And this time, no one could look away. 3 weeks after the documents were made public, Elmswood was no longer the Elmswood it used to be. Cole Rickman, once subdued at the scene, was now formally handcuffed in front of police headquarters, beneath hundreds of flashing cameras and the thunderous chants of justice for all from citizens who had once been trampled under his boots. Gone was the smug grin on Rickman's face, replaced by a stunned disbelief, as if he had never imagined a day the very uniform he exploited would walk him out like a criminal. Ronan Royston, the real estate mogul who had manipulated an entire city council, was arrested at a suburban estate in Alpharetta, where the FBI discovered a cache of forged contracts, recordings of backroom deals, and a safe containing nearly $1.7 million in undeclared cash. That night, the evening news called him the true face of public asset corruption in the South. And when the Elmswood mayor's seat was left vacant, the first to step forward wasn't a politician, but a survivor of the very system they had helped build, Ariana Quill. She announced her candidacy not for power, she said, but for the right to live without fear. An independent oversight board was formed to monitor the police force. New laws mandated that all property seizures and business inspections require dual legal verification and be part of public record. The people of Elmswood, once ignored, now had a voice in every policy affecting their community. And at the corner of 4th and Maple Drive, a place once vandalized, surrounded, and stained with blood, Shepard Spirits and Fine Liquor reopened on a Saturday morning. Dorian Miles Shepard stood behind the counter, dressed in a plain white shirt, quietly polishing glassware. But this time, he wasn't alone. Across the counter stood neighbors who once lowered their gaze at the sight of police. Ariana, who survived the first wave of retaliation. Detective Gideon Trask, who gave up his career for what was right. Agent Jessa Vaughn, who who chose to stay in the town even after being offered a federal promotion. And there were the people, black, brown, white, walk into the store not just to buy wine, but to see a man who stood up for them when no one else dared to. On the wall, the old wooden sign was hung again, carved by hand. It read, "We're still here." A boy, maybe 10, looked up at Miles and asked with wide-eyed curiosity, "Did you really beat up the police?" Miles smiled, leaned down, and whispered, "I didn't beat anyone. I just refused to bow." There were no parades in Elmswood that day, no banners, no speeches on TV, but in the heart of every person, a milestone was etched. For the first time in decades, people no longer feared midnight knocks. They no longer flinched at police headlights sweeping across their windows. Dorian Shepherd didn't change the world, but he changed one corner of it. And from that corner, a whole city began to change itself. And that's how justice begins. Not with gunfire, but with the truth. Not through vengeance, but through renewal. Not in fear, but in resolve. A small store, a quiet veteran, and a town learning how to stand tall again.